Hello, welcome to another weekly devotion with Pastor Andrew. That's me. So, here we are in the last day of July. This month has just been another whirlwind. For me, for my family, June was a whirlwind with graduation, family visiting, all the things happening at church. July has been nothing but a whirlwind. Things happening at church. Our Sundays have each almost been different. Where the regulars are in there, regulars. There's also been, we're outside. We have our fifth Sunday. There's food. Just all the things, all the events that were happening, concerts, picnics, etc. It's just a whirlwind. My calendar is just boom, 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 boom. And I imagine many of our own calendars are the same. So, it's always fascinating, too, excuse me, how the church here, and I know I've only been doing this ordained about 18 years, but then there are the years before that, about 5 or 6, where I was involved very much in the church, but it just strikes me that the text can come anew. I read these texts this year, and there's that newness to them, which I think, of course, is good. As a friend of mine would say, well, that's good, Andrew, that's job security. It's also just the power of the Spirit working in us, as our life changes and we go through these stages, whatever they are, just how the Word can continuously speak to us. And that in itself, when we open ourselves to that, is one thing for me that shows there's something else. There's something else. So, we continue with our God pauses, and this coming Sunday, interestingly enough, is the feeding of the 5,000, but then connected with that, of course, all the different readings, the Old Testament, Psalm, New Testament readings, all speaking to the gifts of God, the free gifts of God, as we'll hear proclaimed in the book of Isaiah in just a moment. What's interesting, though, seeing this is a bit new, or a reminder, in Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew is the one where we get the Sermon on the Mount, right? Chapters 5, 6, and 7, I believe. 5, 6, and 7, Massive sermon, right? If we had to sit there and listen to the sermon, many of us as Lutherans would be like, oh, I can hear our Bills fans, in the back of my head, especially since I've been surrounded by many of them lately. Our Bills fans going like this, saying, hey, the game's starting soon. Oh, wait, the game's over. You're only halfway done? Okay. But it's interesting because I say that because we have the Sermon on the Mount, and it's believed that the feeding of the 5,000 plus, actually took place before that sermon. However, you look at the Gospel of Matthew, and there's no indication that that's happening. Jesus is gathering his disciples. There's been some chit-chat. And then he says, everybody sit on the hill, sit on the mountain, sit on the mountain base. And then he gives his sermon. Well, here we are, this coming Sunday, in chapter 14, all the way into chapter 14, and then suddenly now here's this feeding of the 5,000. And it gives the indication that it is not what we might think in the morning, but then again, the Sermon on the Mount, we don't really have that. Maybe we think it's in the morning because sermons, we hear them in the morning, right? But there's more to this exchange. Hey, it's getting late. People need to go home. It's the Sabbath. And then it's like, oh, well, we have this bread. There's no little boy with bread or no little child with bread and fish. It's like, oh, well, all we have is a couple loaves of bread and some fish. And there's the feeding of the 5,000. However, there is the indication here that it's not just feeding of the 5,000, but it's feeding of 5,000 men, and then women and children also. It's kind of thrown in there as as a second point. Anyway, kind of babbled on about this now, but it's just interesting because it's that reminder that the Gospels and the way that they were written and whatever has happened over the thousands of years, the timeline is sometimes, messed up. And if you're sitting in my office, there's books and books about that specific thing. It's like, well, in Mark it said this, in Luke it said this. All of them are going to say John's a nut job. He's like way out there. And Matthew said this. Well, what's the right thing and how do we figure that out? And people write their dissertations on that or whatever. But it's just interesting in that reminder that we need to keep things in mind. We need to keep the things in mind that the Bible itself and then the Gospels may not necessarily be, I'm blanking on the word, congruent, is that the right word? Set in this timeline, It may jump around a bit. Okay, anyway. Our reading for today is the first 5 chapters of Isaiah 55. The prophet writes, Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you that have no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me, and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food. Incline your ear and come to me, listen, so that you may live. I will make with you an everlasting covenant, my steadfast, sure love for David. See, I made him a witness to the peoples, a leader and commander for the peoples. See, you shall call nations that you do not know, and nations that do not know you shall run to you, because of the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for he has glorified you. What's happening here is Isaiah is conveying the words of God. That's really how this should have started. And God said, boom, come to me, and it's those familiar words, come to me, all those who are hungry, all those who are thirsty, and I will give you water, I will give you food, I will give you rest. This is echoed. We hear Jesus say it, but where is that echoed from? It's echoed here in this promise, in this covenant of God in Isaiah. Very powerful. And isn't it fascinating? Come who thirsts, come to the waters. You that have no money, come and buy this. Well, how can I buy it? I don't have money, right? Well, how do you buy it? You buy it with love. You buy it with, there is no price. You don't need money. Buy wine and milk. These things to sustain your life. I will give them to you. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Eat what is good, delight yourselves in rich food that I give to you. Right? What follows here too, I believe, in Isaiah 55 is that description of the feast on the mountain. What mountain? The Sermon on the Mountain, right? The same mountain. God's mountain. This is the feast I prepared for you, and not just you, but for everyone, right? This leads into here in Isaiah, this leads into Christ, this leads into the readings that we'll hear, this just leads into the gifts of God, all freely given. As we are given the bread of heaven, so too may we go be the bread of heaven and share that with others. This is our calling. This is our commission. And now watch, as I haven't read this devotion, that this writer says that. Our devotional writer writes this, Come and be fed. These words are spoken to the Judeans who have been in exile from their homeland for almost 60 years. Now they are home, but their needs were many. Yes, houses have been rebuilt, wells have been dug, and crops have been planted again. But there were still so many worrisome questions about the future. Would they survive? Yes. Would the crops grow? How long before another enemy attacked? All very legitimate questions. Many of us experience those same feelings. Yes. when the doctor says it's malignant, when our employer says the business is closing, when we watch a loved one slipping into the grip of dementia. When? To the Judeans and to each of us, God says, come to me. Listen, I will make with you an everlasting covenant, a covenant of life, of forgiveness, of love, of God's presence with you always. Yes, yes, yes. Here are the gifts I give you. They don't cost a thing. They are freely given. And then we say, oh, well, no, they have to cost a thing. Yeah, what do they cost? They cost that openness to have that, as we just heard this last Sunday, that mustard seed of possibility, right? To that recognition of that mustard seed, the smallest seed. Now, of course, now we say, well, it's not the smallest seed. But just imagine, I mean, they're so tiny, and they grow to something so great. All those things that we just heard about. See, it's building on all of this. And it's that constant cycle and the gift of the lectionary cycle to build upon what we know. You know, if we've gone through the lectionary cycle once, then every 3 years it's a renovation. And that just speaks to us, right? Because we are a people of renovation, right? Right? Just turn on HDTV. There's a renovation for a renovation. So, you know, hear that promise. Come to me, listen, I will make with you an everlasting covenant, right? A promise. A promise of life, of forgiveness, of love, of my presence, of God's presence, right? With you always. We hear that all the time, but what do we really honor that? And what does that really mean to us? Let's close in prayer. God of the covenant, grant us your loving grace that we may live in the covenant promise that you have given to us. All this in your name. Amen. So again, a lot to think about as we are really right smack dab in the middle of our Pentecost season, the season that is our season to contemplate being disciples. What does that mean? We hear it all the time, but what does it mean? Communally, individually, right? And how is that, here I am knitting, right? How is that interwoven into our secular lives? As we're not always in this place, right? But our mindset must be. This is our commitment. So until next week, God bless.